Arraiz in 1970.
This vibrant neighborhood in the heart of Albuquerque is one of the few areas in the city where residents enjoy life in historic neighborhoods and experience culture, shopping, and fine dining in a walkable area along historic Route 66. But it wasn't always this way. In 1916, the area was a mesa crossed by a few arroyos with a sparse cover of grass and brush. A man of unbounded imagination, Colonel D.K.B. Sellers, saw it as a suburb of Albuquerque's downtown, facilitated by the fact that everyone would soon have an automobile for commuting between the two. Posing with one of his cherished hunting spaniels in his 1938 New Year's card, he wished his friends a Happy New Year from the newest and finest located residential district in Albuquerque.
He sent New Year's cards to people who sent him Christmas cards. He sent them for years and years, and every year they said something different. There was one with the King of Belgium.
It's hard for us to imagine the Nob Hill of today was once the barren landscape we see in that photo. Until the turn of the 20th century, Albuquerque was concentrated in the ancestral floodplain of the Rio Grande, incised deeply below the surrounding mesa. At the edge of the floodplain, sand hills rose 100 feet to the west and east mesas. Up on the east mesa were a few ranching farmsteads, the nascent 1889 University of New Mexico, the Fairview Cemetery, and the beginnings of what would become modern Albuquerque. Albuquerque's dry climate provided a favorable environment for patients chasing the cure for tuberculosis. The Sisters of Charity built St. Joseph's Sanatorium on North Walter Street, and so many were built on what we now call Central Avenue that citizens referred to it for a time as TB Avenue. DeKalb Boyer Sellers was born in Dayton, Ohio in 1861. It was 4 years later that Horace Greeley wrote, "Go west, young man, and grow up with the country." Sellers took the idea to heart, heading west in 1880, spending time in Colorado where he posed for this portrait with a fellow cattle drover or prospector.
He founded a town in Colorado and then lost it in the book again.
He kept moving west and lived for a time in Northern California where he brokered fruit and tobacco and started his scrapbook of newspaper clippings that reported his activities. Said that Humboldt Times in 1893, "There are many ways in which a man in business may keep himself prominently before the people, and Mr. Sellers appears to know the value of printer's ink." After going bust in the panic of 1896, followed by a time prospecting in the Klondike, he arrived to a rapidly growing Albuquerque in 1903. Within 2 years, he had managed the reorganization and sale of the local telephone company. A 1906 article in the Albuquerque Journal describes the splash he made when he ordered 2 Oldsmobiles on the same day. He was an advocate of cars and paved streets, perhaps sensing that they would be the key to the development of the automobile suburbs on the East Mesa.
My father told me not to ride with him because he thought he was a bad driver.
In 1906, he platted the first portion of University Heights south of the University of New Mexico, naming the streets after prominent colleges to enhance its cachet. Platting establishes streets, lots, and utility easements that facilitate the building of neighborhoods. He said in his brochure, "Every house built and every improvement made in the addition tends to increase the value of the remaining property, and naturally our prices will advance accordingly. Our terms are $5 down on each lot when purchasing 2 or more lots, and $10 down when purchasing only 1 lot. Prices range from $25 to $275 per lot." He worked hard for New Mexico's statehood, organizing parades and rallies.
And he had taught the guys who were with him that didn't speak English that whenever he stamped his foot, they would say something
In Navajo.
and he would go ahead and say how the Indians wanted New Mexico to become a state also.
In April 1912, he was sworn in as mayor, just 3 months after New Mexico's statehood. He constructed a house for himself on multiple lots on the northeast corner of Vassar and Silver Avenues in his University Heights addition.
This is a picture of my grandfather and my grandmother in the house on Vassar. She was into gardening, and he built her a greenhouse. This was in back of the main house in Vassar. Oh, he was very fond of dogs. There's a block between Tulane and Wellesley and about Cole and some other street that he had the whole block stopped, and he wouldn't let anybody, he wouldn't sell lots in this block, and that's where he buried all his dogs that died.
In February 1916, with the United States still pursuing a policy of neutrality in Europe, Colonel Sellers was ready to plat the eastern portion of University Heights, the first subdivision of what we now call Nob Hill. Ever the promoter, he encouraged prospects to move out of the low zone and up to the ozone. That year, former President Theodore Roosevelt created a stir when he visited Albuquerque. Colonel Sellers demonstrated his skill for publicity when he gave an interview to a reporter saying, "Albuquerque to a man resents the story that Theodore Roosevelt entered a cheap saloon and that he there drank 6 drinks of cheap whiskey."
How he's trying to market and sell the area. The number of automobiles passing the University Heights Development Company, my great-grandfather's company, between East Central Avenue, or on East Central between Yale and Harvard, follows. And so he counts the number of cars and property values and lots on University Heights and Nob Hill are consistently enhancing in value.
There was no city water service to the area, so Colonel Sellers drilled a well on the highest point at Carlisle Boulevard and what is today known as Cole Avenue. When city water service was extended to the area, he sold the water tank and 2 lots it stood on to construction engineer Alfred Priestley and his wife Edith, who built a house around the tank. The house stands today well loved by its current stewards. Over a period of years and through the efforts of countless contractors, architects, builders, and residents, the area steadily changed from mesa and brush to a community. Houses were typically constructed by small contractors who purchased lots and built houses on contract or speculation. By World War II, nearly 80% of Nob Hill was built out. Although he used the title Colonel, Sellers was never in the military. Someone gave him the title during the time he lived in California, and he enjoyed it so much he just held on to it.
Yeah, it sounded pretty official to him. It gave him sort of an official effect.
In 1929, he built the log cabin at 212 South Tulane with his friend, lumberman Colonel George Brees.
I just remember the story from my father, actually. That it was the big joke with he and Colonel Brees built it as a joke. And because the Colonel Brees owned this lumber yard, so that's where all the wood came from. That's where I guess all the logs came from.
It's been said that the incline on Carlisle Boulevard south of Central reminded Sellers of Nob Hill in San Francisco, and that he considered it a proper name for the coming aristocratic section of Albuquerque. In the 29 years following the platting of University Heights, developers platted 5 additional subdivisions and small commercial subdivisions that make up the Nob Hill of today. In 1937, Route 66 was relocated to run through Nob Hill from its original route through Las Vegas, New Mexico, Santa Fe, and Los Lunas. The number of buildings on Central Avenue in Nob Hill went from 6 to 44 between 1930 and 1939. For the next 30 years, Nob Hill provided the goods and services needed by motorists who traveled the storied road, and for developing nearby neighborhoods. Nob Hill became the automobile-oriented suburb most associated with Route 66 and the vanguard for development of the East Mesa. In the 1960s, the interstate highway system drained travelers off of Route 66, and Nob Hill came on hard times. Through the efforts of its citizens, it was revitalized in the 1980s. Because its residential neighborhoods and commercial district are so well integrated, it's among the city's most desirable neighborhoods. Nob Hill contains over 3,000 residences, the vast majority still retaining their historic character, giving a keen insight into what life was like in those times and a record for historians in the future. Many of its 275 businesses occupy buildings that still reflect the sense of place that people experienced when Route 66 first came through. While some still fulfill their original function, others have been repurposed to preserve their historic character while responding to changing times. 2016 marks the 100th anniversary of Nob Hill. Its people celebrate our cultural and architectural legacy, our sense of place, our traditions and ways of life, our schools and our students, our faith community, the heyday of Route 66, our revitalization in the 80s, our diverse community past and present, and the imagination of Colonel D.K.B. Sellers.